This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Laura Trevelyan. Scenes of devastation from Indonesia, where at least 1,300 people have died in the earthquake and tsunami which struck the region.
A sea of mud that fell down the mountain and has buried all of the houses right up to halfway, and some of the inhabitants too.
As the FBI continues its investigation into Brett Kavanaugh, President Trump defends his nominee for now and says it's a scary time for young men in America. Plus, Texas is serving up a Senate race with high stakes. Democrats are hoping to pull off an upset, but has the state really changed its tune? Welcome to our viewers on public television in America and around the globe. Scenes of complete destruction are everywhere on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, and now it's a race against time to reach survivors of the devastating earthquake and tsunami. More than 1,300 people are known to have died, and that number is still rising. For those who survived, thousands are homeless and needing emergency aid, with food and water in short supply. The BBC's Jonathan Head is in Palu, one of the worst-hit areas on the island of Sulawesi.
3 days under the ruins of an office building, but he's alive. Few of the victims have been as lucky as this 38-year-old man, pulled out after a 3-hour rescue operation. Many more are still buried in these impossible mountains of rubble. In the city centre, they're trying to open some of the blocked roads. But from the air you can see what the Indonesian government is up against. This is the village of Balaroa, which was literally swallowed by the liquefying ground churned up by the earthquake. And here in Petobo, they were hit by a mudslide. Sometimes it seems this city's been hit by a whole series of catastrophes, not just the earthquake and the tsunami, but in this neighbourhood, a sea of mud that fell down the mountain and has buried all of the houses right up to halfway, and some of the inhabitants too. Made Mastro has come back with his youngest son to check what's left of his home. They had a narrow escape. The mud came down right after the earthquake, he told me. 3 or 4 minutes later, he and his family just ran, with only the clothes they were wearing. Made and his neighbours have salvaged what they can, but it isn't much. They need everything, and they're not getting it yet. So Palu's inhabitants are taking matters into their own hands. Here, trying to break into a small supermarket, and then being driven back by police officers who seemed afraid of being overrun. 1 hour later, though, the police relented, and the crowd poured into the shop. They did make a token effort to stop non-essential items being looted, but a government unable to help most of these earthquake victims can't really stop them helping themselves. The first real sign of order we saw, this extraordinary line for petrol, each bottle with its own queue number, while its owners sit in the shade for the long hours they'll have to wait. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Palu, Indonesia.
International efforts are underway to help those in the most devastated areas, but for many it can't come soon enough. The BBC's Hal Griffiths reports from Makassar.
Desperate for help after days without food. When the aid convoy finally arrived at this camp near Donggala, it was grab what you can. Shelter and supplies are getting to some of the 60,000 people forced from their homes, but thousands more are out of reach, with roads turned to rubble.
Naturally, Indonesia's people want to help too. They've been donating boxes of food, water, mountains of clothes. The only problem is getting it to those in need. With the roads impassable, all of this will somehow have to be put on a boat and sail to the north of the island.
It is a frenetic, heartfelt response But some of these volunteers also feel frustrated.
We need more help from the government because we are human. We need all the help we can get.
More help is coming slowly. The Indonesian authorities admit they were not well prepared.
It's not impossible to prepare for disasters like this, but it is very difficult. One of the frustrations for the humanitarian sector is that disasters are treated as surprising events to which we all have to respond, whereas actually we mostly know where disasters take place.
Every aid flight which leaves this airbase has returned carrying people fleeing the disaster zone. Some clutch their only possessions, others hold on to the hope that missing relatives will be found. This woman told us her 2-year-old niece hasn't been seen since Friday. She's too young to speak, she says. The only words she knows are mum and dad. The agony some here feel cannot be quelled, but they need their nation and the world to support them.
So much heartbreak there in Indonesia, and that was reporting there from Makassar. Now, President Trump says he's still waiting for the FBI investigation, but for now he's standing behind Brett Kavanaugh. Speaking before he left the White House, Mr. Trump said it seemed like his Supreme Court nominee was being treated as guilty until proven innocent, and that led to a larger issue in society.
It's a very scary time for young men in America when you can be guilty of something that you may not be guilty of. This is a very difficult time.
Well, the FBI has been given a week to conduct their expanded background check, but is that enough time? For answers, we spoke earlier to retired FBI agent Warren Flagg. Do you think, with your experience, can the FBI conduct a meaningful investigation by Friday into the events of 30 years ago?
Absolutely. And why I say that is because the enormity of this particular investigation, the FBI will spare no asset and will conduct these investigations ASAP, as soon as possible.
Well, it's good to hear your confidence there, but meanwhile tonight, Dr. Ford's lawyers have written to the FBI Director Chris Wray saying that their client has not yet been contacted by the FBI and they haven't asked her for an interview. Would you expect that Dr. Ford would be interviewed by the FBI as part of this investigation?
Well, Dr. Ford has been extensively interviewed prior to the FBI getting involved, and that's really up to the head person at the Bureau to figure out whether there's anything additional to be spoken about. She was under oath during the hearing, and I don't know if there's any additional information that would be gleaned. If there is additional information, I'm sure they would contact the lawyers and set up an interview. So we have to take it a day at a time, an hour at a time, a minute at a time, and they will exhaust and every lead. I will assure the public that that will occur.
Now, how about the scope of the investigation? Because Dr. Ford says Judge Kavanaugh was drunk at the time of the alleged assault. So should the scope include his drinking in high school and in college, especially as there are questions about whether he was truthful about his drinking when he was under testimony in front of Congress?
Well, let me explain it this way. I'm sure that the Bureau went in and took all the reports from the Democratic side and all the reports from the Republican side and took any other information. And they allowed those agents to go out, teams of very dedicated special agents, to go out and specifically delve into the background. So those questions are on the table. I can't, and you can't, and nobody can predict what those investigations are going to reveal. They will collate all that, send it to headquarters, write up a report of all the interviews, and turn it over to the Judiciary Committee.
And Warren Flagg, the former FBI director, says significant drives memory. Do you expect people could remember significant events from more than 30 years ago?
I don't know. I can't speak for those people who are being interviewed. So I know those questions will be asked. If I was doing it, I'd ask those questions. And I'm sure my colleagues who are currently employed at the FBI will be debriefed properly. They will handle this properly as professionals, and they will remain anonymous unless that interviewee obviously breaks it to the press.
Warren Flagg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and good night.
In other news now, the Pentagon says it's received mail suspected of containing the deadly poison ricin. One envelope sent to the Pentagon was addressed to Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Officials say the FBI are now investigating. Ricin is highly toxic, and exposure to it can lead to death. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. China is showing the world it's open for business. But behind all the show, is there also a threat? A scientist who pioneered the use of lasers has become the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Physics in more than 50 years. Donna Strickland from Canada shares this year's award with a Frenchman and an American. Victoria Gill has this report.
2018 Nobel Prize in Physics.
The ultimate scientific accolade. And Professor Donna Strickland is only the third woman ever to have won a Nobel Prize in Physics. She and her fellow winners were honoured for what the Nobel Committee called groundbreaking inventions in laser physics. Professor Strickland devised a way to use lasers as very precise drilling or cutting tools. Millions of eye operations are performed every year with these sharpest of laser beams.
How surprising do you think it is that you're the third woman to win this prize?
Well, that is surprising, isn't it? I think that's the story that people want to talk about, that why should it take 60 years? There's so many women out there doing fantastic research, so why does it take so long to get recognized?
Here at Oxford's Department of Nuclear Physics,
physics still has one of the largest gender gaps in science. One recent study concluded that at the current rates it would be more than 2 centuries until there were equal numbers of senior male and female researchers in the field.
Not only is this great for women, it's great for early career researchers that you can make discoveries and inventions that will change the world, and you can do that at any point in your career, and it doesn't matter what background or gender you are.
The last woman to win a physics Nobel was German-born Maria Goeppert-Mayer in 1963 for her discoveries about the nuclei of atoms. Before that, it was Marie Curie who shared the 1903 prize with her husband Pierre. This year's winners hope that breaking this half-century hiatus will mean the focus in future will be on the research rather than the gender of the researcher. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
In just 5 weeks from now, voters here in the US will cast their ballots in the midterm elections. All eyes will be on the Democrats to see if they can pick up key seats and tip the balance of power in Washington. Of the 35 Senate races taking place, one of the most closely watched is in Texas, where sitting Republican Senator Ted Cruz is trying to fend off a challenge by Democrat Beto O'Rourke. From Dallas, the BBC's James Cook reports.
Texas is changing. It's becoming more urban and less white. The Democrats haven't won a Senate seat here for 30 years, but maybe the Lone Star State is about to see a new wave.
Hey Edinburgh, how are you? Good to see you.
This former punk rocker wants to shake things up, reforming police and prisons, embracing immigration, spending more on health and education. Critics call Beto O'Rourke a socialist, a dirty word here.
These are common sense Texas American values, and I know from listening to the people in every one of these counties that we're beyond the partisanship and the labels. We just want action. We want to get things done.
The energy energy surrounding this campaign is rooted in the hope of people who are disenchanted with the state of this rich and powerful nation. And it's the latest evidence that Americans are prepared to consider some very different solutions to their country's problems. That'll be the day, say the many Texans who prefer tradition. In Buddy Holly's hometown, Ted Cruz has been forced onto the attack to defend his Senate seat.
This is fundamentally a debate between the crazy left wing and the great people of the state of Texas.
They like the style of the man in the ostrich skin boots. Why do you like Ted Cruz?
His conservative values.
I just really like his morals. I think he's a very Christian man, and that's the most important thing to me.
But he's not turning the other cheek, calling this a fight against the tyranny of socialism.
Socialism is government ownership or control of the means of production or distribution in an economy.
And Congressman O'Rourke doesn't support that, does he?
He supports socialized medicine, and socialized medicine is socializing medicine. I mean, it's very simple. You're from the UK, I take it?
Yeah, I am.
So you're familiar with socialized medicine. That's what it is. And as Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism, eventually you run out of other people's money.
But younger Texans sound much more open to trying something different. In the bars of Dallas, it's Beto O'Rourke who's the talk of the town.
Texas is changing. I've seen a lot of Beto O'Rourke signs on lawns. I've seen a lot of folks campaigning for Beto. I think the folks here at this table have really been excited for Beto in a way that's really invigorating, exciting for America.
They want someone younger who they can relate to, who has been through similar struggles and who is conscientious of the privilege that he has been afforded.
Whiskey River don't run dry.
Even with the support of Willie Nelson, Beto O'Rourke's task is tough. But a Liberal victory in conservative Texas no longer looks impossible. James Cook, BBC News, Dallas.
Well, tonight President Trump will be back on the campaign trail, this time in Mississippi. The BBC's RAJINI VAIDYANATHAN is already there, and she joined us a short time ago. RAJINI, the president, it feels like he's the campaigner-in-chief during the midterms. Is his role to fire up the base and get people out to vote?
It absolutely is, Laura. As you can see, there are still hundreds of people filing in to this rally in Southaven, Mississippi, hoping to meet or at least listen to President Trump. And that is because even though he is not on the ballot, he may have an impact on the way people vote and indefinitely in terms of getting out the vote in a place like here, where Mississippi, yesterday he was in Tennessee, he's in Kansas later this week, in Iowa early next week, where the Republicans could be in some trouble. So he's trying to sprinkle some presidential stardust on these races to try and get out the Republican vote.
RAJINI, you've covered many of these President Trump rallies, and when he was a candidate too. What's the mood there like tonight?
You know Well, he never really stopped campaigning even after he won office, and the mood here is certainly one of defiance. People here saying we are solidly behind our president, despite the fact that there might be a Russia investigation going on. They're also solidly behind Brett Kavanaugh in the wake of last week's hearing. Most people I spoke to say they don't believe Christine Blasey Ford, and they are looking forward to Brett Kavanaugh being a conservative Supreme Court justice. So just like in 2016, the base, certainly the core supporters of Donald Trump, are here and they are incredibly loyal. The question, of course, as we head into the midterms is whether they will be enough to make sure that Republicans hold power.
And RAJINI, people are turning out to see President Trump come to a rally, but have you got much sense of whether these people are also going to go to the polls and vote in those key Senate races there in Mississippi?
Well, that's always a good question, but people here are certainly fired up. People are looking ahead to the midterms. They're very keen to make sure that the Senate is still in Republican hands, and indeed the House of Representatives. So one would imagine that a lot of the activism here today will translate into votes. And I have to say, we talk about a divided America. People here don't have much positive to say about the Democrats.
RAJINI VAIDYANATHAN, thanks so much for joining us. For months, China and the United States have been battling over trade and over tariffs. The escalating trade war comes as Beijing is making ever bolder military moves in the South China Sea, taking over disputed reefs. But how worried should the West be? The BBC's World Affairs editor John Simpson has been reporting from China for 30 years. He's returned to assess the latest developments.
In the breathtaking setting of the Great Wall, a Ukrainian model poses for a British fashion photographer.
Just relax this arm a little bit.
Still, it's the dress that's the centre of attention, and that's Chinese designed. Yes, China is open to the world, but increasingly on China's own terms. The wall was built to keep the outside world at arm's length. Now, the long centuries of isolation are over. Today, everything here is about outreach. China's building an immense new transport network, the Belt and Road Initiative, to spread its goods and influence worldwide. Yue Kexing is a small cog in this vast project, working on a new airport in Chengdu.
I feel extremely excited, and I feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I understand too, for the country's development, we need to make personal sacrifices.
One sacrifice is that he's separated from his daughter Yiling. She is in Africa, working on a new airport for Zambia, part of the Belt and Road Initiative.
First, the One Belt, One Road can increase the trade between China and other countries. It also can increase the infrastructure in Zambia and it also in China. I think it's the win-win, two-win things.
Still, as Chinese technology starts to become dominant, the West increasingly sees China as a threat. This intricate dance for 100 driverless cars was staged by China's rival to Google, Baidu. And now Baidu is trying out a driverless bus. Yet Baidu's president insists that China isn't a threat.
China is a partner. It is a positive force of the world. And I think U.S. need to understand that, the world need to understand that. For companies like Baidu, we are a global partner. Of course, we thrive in China, but also we like to be a global player.
For decades now, China's been biding its time, getting quietly richer and stronger. Now, though, it feels the moment's arrived. A year ago, over there in the Great Hall of the People, Xi Jinping, who's leader for life if he chooses to be, committed China to becoming a world leader in innovation, in influence, and in military power. What he didn't add was that China's also becoming far more authoritarian. My local producer shows me what happens if you try to text the name of a government critic on social media.
I'm gonna say we would like to arrange an interview.
Yep, that's
through. Come through. Okay.
Okay, now put his name. See what happens when you do that.
Let's try that.
You've sent it, but it's not come through.
Nope.
So it's blocked. Yet, even though he's constantly monitored, I managed to meet up with another dissident, Li Datong, a journalist who recently wrote an open letter strongly critical of President Xi.
Currently, under Xi Jinping, power is becoming more and more concentrated. The country will be more a tyranny. There will be more stamping on the rule of law. The outlook is completely pessimistic.
The problem is that China's values are so different from the West's. It demands total obedience to the state and resents any outside criticism, though China insists it's no threat to the West. What does it all come down to? Is China the West's friend or potential enemy? Well, it's too rich and too inclined to flex its muscles to be an easy friend. Yet it's not so much a foe as a competitor. The trouble is, history shows that competition, unchecked, can have a dangerous habit of turning really nasty. John Simpson, BBC News, on the Great Wall.
The changing face of China there. And remember, you can find much more on all the day's news at our website. Plus, to see what we're working on at any time, make sure to check us out on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thanks so much for watching BBC World News America.